The Last Wish. The fluorescent lights of the death row wing hummed, casting a sterile glow on Caelan Thorne's cell. He sat on the edge of his cot, hands clasped, the rough fabric of his prison-issued jumpsuit doing little to soften the chill that seemed to seep into his bones. His gaze was fixed on the chipped paint of the far wall, a canvas for the memories that flickered behind his eyes. The clock on the wall above the guard station ticked with deliberate slowness, each second a hammer blow against the dwindling moments of his life. C.O. Jenkins' voice, an oily drawl Caelan had come to despise, cut through the silence. "Thorne, Warden wants your final wish. Make it quick, we ain't got all day." Caelan turned, his eyes meeting Jenkins through the narrow slot in the door. Jenkins was leaning against the opposite wall, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. C.O. Miller, younger and less overtly cruel, but still eager to please his senior, stood a few feet away, mirroring Jenkins's posture. "I want to see Rex," Caelan said, his voice a low rumble, devoid of inflection. Jenkins snorted, a harsh dismissive sound. "Rex? Your canine partner? You're serious?" He exchanged a look with Miller, who chuckled, a nervous, reedy sound. "What, you gonna play fetch in the yard one last time? Maybe he can sniff out a treat in your death meal." Caelan ignored the taunts, his gaze steady. "It's my wish." Jenkins pushed off the wall, sauntering closer to Caelan's cell. All right, tough guy. Warden might go for it. You always were a softie for that beast. A shame, really. Most officers don't get a dog that loyal. Guess it's a good thing, huh? Less chance of him missing you after they flip the switch." His words were laced with a venomous satisfaction. Caelan felt a familiar clench in his gut, a mix of anger and sorrow he'd grown accustomed to. He simply stared at Jenkins, his silence a shield against the guard's barbs. Jenkins, clearly frustrated by Caelan's lack of reaction, huffed and turned away, muttering, "What a waste of time." The hours crawled by, marked only by the change of guards and the rattling of the meal cart. Caelan ate nothing, his stomach a knot of anticipation and dread. He thought of Rex, a powerful German shepherd, all muscle and intelligent eyes, a partner who had been more family than any blood relative. The thought of seeing him, even under these circumstances, brought a faint warmth to his chest. Finally, the distant sound of heavy paws on polished concrete echoed down the corridor. The clinking of a chain, the soft panting, Caelan's breath hitched. A moment later, a handler, a stocky woman in a uniform Caelan didn't recognize, appeared at the end of the hall, leading Rex. Rex was magnificent. His golden brown fur shimmered under the fluorescent lights, his ears perked, a picture of alert composure. His eyes, dark and intelligent, scanned the row of cells, a silent question in their depths. The handler tightened her grip on his leash as they approached Caelan's cell. "All right, Thorne, here's your dog," Jenkins announced, a bored tone in his voice. He stood with Miller a few feet back, observing the scene with detached amusement. The handler guided Rex to stand directly in front of Caelan's cell. Caelan rose, moving slowly to the bars, his hand outstretched, palm open. Rex's tail gave a tentative wag, his keen nose twitching. He looked at Caelan, his eyes holding a depth of understanding that transcended words. A low whine escaped the dog's throat, a sound of longing and recognition. Then Rex's head snapped up. His ears swiveled, focusing past Caelan, past the handler, directly on Jenkins. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that vibrated through the very floor. It started soft, barely audible, then swelled into a guttural snarl that made the air crackle. His hackles rose, a bristling ridge of fur along his spine. His lips curled back, revealing formidable fangs. His body tensed, every muscle coiled and ready. He lunged, a sudden, explosive burst of power, straining against the leash with shocking force. The handler cried out, struggling to maintain her grip as Rex threw himself at the bars, teeth snapping inches from Jenkins's face. The dog barked, a furious, deafening roar that echoed through the silent cell block, a sound of pure, unadulterated aggression. He wasn't just agitated, he was enraged. Jenkins, startled, stumbled backward, his face paling, a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. "Whoa, what the hell? Control your beast!" he yelled, his voice cracking. Rex continued to snarl, his focus unwavering on Jenkins. He lunged again, slamming his body against the steel bars, a frantic, desperate attempt to get to the guard. The handler was now actively wrestling with him, her feet skidding on the polished floor. "He's never done this before," she gasped, her voice strained. "He's usually so calm." Miller, who had also jumped back, looked nervously between Rex and Jenkins. The previous amusement had vanished from his face, replaced by a bewildered concern. Kalen watched, a cold certainty settling in his stomach. Rex wasn't just reacting, he was targeting. There was a primal, undeniable fury in the dog's actions, a clarity of purpose that transcended mere agitation. Rex wasn't just seeing a uniform, he was seeing something specific about Jenkins. The scene continued, Rex's furious barks and snarls echoing, Jenkins's bewildered fear evident in his wide eyes and retreating posture. The handler finally managed to pull Rex back a few feet, but the dog remained rigid, his gaze locked on Jenkins, a low, continuous growl vibrating through his powerful frame. He continued to strain against the leash, a living embodiment of canine rage. The air in the death row wing, already thick with unspoken anxieties, now thrummed with a raw, unexpected tension. Everyone present felt it, the prickling sensation of something profoundly wrong. Kalen's mind, usually a quiet storm of introspection, suddenly sharpened. Rex, his loyal, highly trained partner, was never aggressive without reason. This wasn't just a dog reacting to a stranger, this was a dog reacting to an enemy. And in the sterile, controlled environment of death row, an enemy was a dangerous thing to identify. A sliver of hope, fragile but undeniable, began to bloom in Kalen's chest. Rex was telling them something important. The handler, breathless and sweating, finally managed to drag Rex away, the dog's growls still echoing down the corridor until they faded into the distance. Jenkins, still pale, visibly composed himself, straightening his uniform. He shot a glare at Kalen, crazy animal, just like his owner. But the bluster lacked conviction. The fear had been too real, too raw. Kalen merely looked at him, a silent question in his eyes. The seed of doubt planted by Rex's furious outburst had taken root. And in the unforgiving soil of death row, doubt was a powerful, unpredictable force. The memory of his arrest, a blur of flashing lights and shouted commands, played in Kalen's mind. The chief, his face grim, reading the charges. The evidence, circumstantial but damning, piling up against him like stones. The conviction, a swift, brutal judgment. He had been a decorated officer then, in the blink of an eye, a condemned man. He had accepted his fate with the stoicism of a man who believed he deserved punishment for his perceived failures, if not for the crime itself. But Rex's reaction, it was a rupture in that acceptance. It hinted at a truth Kalen had almost given up on. The next few hours were a tense quiet. Kalen sat, replaying the scene. Rex's aggression wasn't random. It was a targeted fury. It was as if the dog recognized something, someone, in Jenkins that no one else could see. The prison staff, initially dismissive, now moved with a new unease, exchanging glances, their whispers carrying a different tone. The execution was still scheduled, the clock still ticked, but now a new element had been introduced, an unpredictable primal force that refused to be ignored. The air was thick with the scent of fear and the unspoken question, what did Rex know? The acrid tang of burnt chemicals still clung to the air, a phantom limb of the chaos that had erupted moments before. Kalen's head throbbed, a drumbeat of agony against the insistent ringing in his ears. He blinked, the flickering strobe of emergency lights painting the scene in stark, disorienting flashes. A shattered window, the jagged edges glinting like malevolent teeth, marked the entry point. Dust motes danced in the artificial light, swirling around the overturned tables and scattered drug paraphernalia. The air, heavy with the metallic scent of blood and fear, clawed at his throat. Then he saw him. Marcus, his partner. Splayed awkwardly across the linoleum, eyes wide and unseeing, a dark stain blossoming on his chest. Kalen scrambled towards him, a primal scream tearing at his vocal cords. but his legs were leaden, his vision blurring. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the cold, lifeless skin. The evidence bag, once clutched tightly in Marcus's hand, lay crumpled and empty beside him. A cold dread, sharper than any physical pain, pierced Caelan's dazed mind. He remembered the struggle, the shadowy figure, the crushing blow to his head. Nothing more. Hours later, the sterile interrogation room felt like a freezer. The fluorescent lights hummed, a monotonous drone that amplified the throbbing behind Caelan's eyes. Detective Miller, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with cynicism, leaned across the table. "We know about your gambling debts, Thorne," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "The foreclosure on your house, your wife leaving." Each word was a calculated jab designed to dismantle him. Caelan stared at the scarred tabletop, the wood grain swirling into meaningless patterns. He remembered Miller's questions, relentless and accusatory, twisting every fact, every silence into an admission of guilt. He had protested vehemently at first, then with a growing weariness as the hours bled into one another. He remembered the thirst, the gnawing hunger, the blurring of reality. He remembered signing the paper, the pen heavy and unfamiliar in his trembling hand, the words a jumble of legalese he couldn't comprehend. He remembered the dull ache of resignation that settled in his bones. The trial was a blur of legal jargon and hushed whispers. The prosecution painted a vivid picture of a desperate man, driven to betrayal by financial ruin. They highlighted the empty evidence bag, the absence of any other suspects, the convenient blackout. Caelan's dazed, coerced confession, ripped from him in a moment of utter exhaustion and despair, was the damning centerpiece. His lawyer, a public defender who seemed more interested in the clock than his client, mounted a half-hearted defence, barely challenging the flimsy circumstantial evidence. The jury, their faces impassive and judgmental, delivered their verdict swiftly. Guilty. The word echoed in the silent courtroom, a death knell. Caelan felt a strange detachment, as if he were watching a play unfold, an actor in a tragedy he couldn't escape. The gavel struck, a sharp final crack that sealed his fate. Life, or rather, the slow, agonizing wait for its end, on death row. Now, years later, the memory of that brutal day, of Marcus's still form and the cold weight of the empty evidence bag, still haunted his waking moments and infiltrated his dreams. Rex's sudden fury towards Jenkins, however, had ignited a spark, a fragile, dangerous hope in Caelan's chest. The dog knew. He had always known. And if Rex knew, then maybe, just maybe, the truth wasn't buried forever. The image of Jenkins's startled face, the flicker of something akin to fear in his eyes as Rex lunged, was burned into Caelan's mind. It was a detail that hadn't been there before, a piece of the puzzle that had been missing. The scent. Rex's incredible nose. The dog wasn't just reacting to a uniform, he was reacting to a scent, a memory, a betrayal. The guards, initially amused by the condemned man's request, were now exchanging uneasy glances. Rex continued to snarl, a low, guttural growl rumbling in his chest, his eyes fixed on Jenkins. The other canine handlers struggled to control him, their usual commands proving useless against the dog's unwavering focus. Jenkins, his face paling, backed away, a tremor in his hand as he fumbled for his radio. "Get this animal out of here," he barked, his voice higher than usual. But Rex wouldn't be moved. He strained against his leash, a relentless force of canine fury, pulling his handler inexorably closer to Jenkins. The air crackled with unspoken questions, with the raw, undeniable intensity of the dog's accusation. A seed of doubt, planted by a loyal canine, began to unfurl in the sterile confines of death row. An unsettling alert. The air in the visitation room, already thick with the metallic tang of fear and stale disinfectant, grew taut. Rex, a creature of instinct and unwavering loyalty, continued his guttural growl, a low, persistent rumble that vibrated through the floor. His gaze, usually soft and intelligent, was fixed with laser-like intensity on C.O. Jenkins. The dog's powerful frame, coiled and tense, seemed to vibrate with suppressed fury. Jenkins, initially dismissive, now stood rigid, a vein throbbing visibly in his temple. The casual smirk had been replaced by a pallor that spread from his jawline, and his eyes darted nervously between the furious canine and the other officers present. Caelan, shackled but upright, felt a spark ignite within the barren landscape of his despair. He watched Rex, his heart thrumming with a cadence he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't the agitated whimpering of a confused animal. This was the honed response of a working dog, an alert. Rex had always possessed an uncanny ability to sense deception, an almost psychic radar for malice. He remembered countless cases, the subtle shifts in Rex's posture, the nearly imperceptible tightening of his muscles, always preceding the unravelling of a lie, the discovery of a hidden weapon, or the identification of a guilty party. Once, Rex had located a missing child buried beneath a collapsed building, not by sight or sound, but by some intrinsic knowing, a silent communication with a faint scent of fear. The other guards exchanged uneasy glances. The initial amusement at Caelan's morbid request had evaporated. This wasn't a sentimental reunion, it was an active alert from a highly trained canine. Jenkins, struggling to regain his composure, forced a laugh that sounded brittle and false. "What's wrong with this beast? Probably hasn't been properly exercised. Get him out of here before he bites someone." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. But Rex refused to be dismissed. He lunged forward, his leash straining against the handler's grip, a ferocious bark erupting from his chest. The sound ripped through the sterile silence, startling even Caelan, who felt a surge of cold fury at Jenkins's feigned ignorance. Rex was not agitated, he was communicating, he was accusing. A deeper, more resonant voice cut through the tension. "Officer Jenkins," Warden Thorne stated, his gaze unwavering, "step away from the perimeter. And you," he turned to Rex's handler, a stocky, grizzled man named Miller, "explain this behaviour. This is not the canine I'm familiar with from your reports." Miller, his brow furrowed with concern, struggled to maintain control of the straining dog. "Warden, Rex has always been exemplary, never shown unprovoked aggression. He's trained for specific alerts, drugs, explosives, human scent. This is an alert I haven't seen since a suspect tried to pull a knife during a search warrant." He glanced at Jenkins, a flicker of suspicion entering his eyes. "He's reacting to something very specific on Officer Jenkins." Jenkins blustered, his face now a mottled red. "Nonsense, the dog's clearly unstable. Maybe he's just picking up on the general stress of the environment. I'm a correctional officer, for God's sake. I'm around inmates all day. The dog probably just senses my vigilance." His words lacked conviction, his gaze still flitting nervously. Caelan watched Jenkins, a cold, calculating resolve hardening his features. He remembered the empty evidence bag, the fabricated confession, the way Marcus's blood had painted the alley. He remembered the crushing weight of injustice. And now, Rex, his loyal, intelligent partner, was pointing a paw, barking a silent accusation. The impossible truth, a desperate, fragile hope, began to solidify. Rex wasn't just reacting to stress, he was reacting to guilt. He was reacting to a scent, a memory, a truth that Caelan himself had been too broken to perceive. The warden's eyes, usually impassive, narrowed. "Officer Miller, is there any possibility of Rex reacting to a specific individual's scent? Perhaps one that might have been present at a crime scene?" His voice was low, cutting through the rapidly thickening atmosphere. He was no fool. He understood the implications of a trained canine's sustained, aggressive alert. The dog wasn't just barking, he was talking. And Caelan, watching the beads of sweat form on Jenkins's temples, began to believe Rex was about to speak volumes. The clatter of ceramic against the chipped formica of the precinct break room usually signalled the arrival of Sergeant Miller, but today it was her voice that snagged Anya Sharma's attention. "You hear about that dog at Blackwood?" Miller asked, her tone a mix of disbelief and morbid fascination. Anya, hunched over a lukewarm cup of instant coffee, barely grunted in response. Her mind was still sifting through the previous night's cold case reports, a habit she'd never quite broken, even when off duty. "Caelan's dog," Miller elaborated, oblivious to Anya's disinterest. "Rex, the one he requested for his final visitation. Apparently the canine went absolutely wild, lunging at Jenkins. C.O. Jenkins, you know him? Anyway, the warden had to intervene. Total circus. Miller shook her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. Almost makes you wonder if there's more to it, doesn't it? Anya froze, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. Caelan's dog, Rex. The name sent a jolt through her, a tremor of unease. Of all the canines she'd encountered in her career, Rex was singular. His intelligence was unnerving, his loyalty legendary, and his ability to detect deceit almost supernatural. She remembered a particularly thorny interrogation where Rex, a mere pup then, had whined incessantly at a suspect who'd ultimately confessed to a murder he'd vehemently denied. Rex didn't just bark, he alerted. And an alert on a CO during a final visitation, that was unprecedented. A knot tightened in Anya's stomach. The Caelan case. It had gnawed at her for years, a persistent burr under her saddle. She'd been a junior detective then, fresh out of the academy, full of idealism and an unwavering belief in the infallibility of the justice system. But even then, something about Caelan's conviction had felt off. The evidence, while seemingly damning, had always possessed an unsettling tidiness, a convenience that had always pricked at her intuition. It was a feeling she'd learned to trust, a quiet hum beneath the surface of official narratives. She remembered the way Caelan had carried himself during the trial, not with the expected defiance of the wrongly accused, nor the brokenness of the guilty, but with a weary resignation, a profound sadness that had struck Anya as out of place. He'd never truly fought, never vehemently protested his innocence beyond the initial statements. It was as if he'd simply accepted his fate, even as the world condemned him. That passivity, coupled with the convenient evidence, had always bothered her. She'd voiced her concerns to her then superior, Detective Thorne, only to be met with a dismissive wave and a lecture on the dangers of emotional attachment to cases. Thorne had always preferred clean, quick resolutions. Now, years later, Miller's casual remark had ripped open that old wound. Rex's behaviour wasn't random, Anya knew that much. He was a precision instrument, finely tuned to the nuances of human deception. For him to react so violently, so specifically to a prison guard, it wasn't just a circus, it was a signal, a desperate, primal accusation. She pushed away her coffee, the lukewarm liquid suddenly tasting like ash. The cold case files, gathering dust in the archives, beckoned. Her initial review had been cursory, bound by the constraints of her junior status and Thorne's dismissiveness. But now she was a seasoned detective with a reputation for meticulousness, even obsession. She had the authority and, more importantly, the stubborn conviction to revisit the past. The thought of delving back into Caelan's files was daunting. It meant reopening old wounds, challenging established narratives, and potentially incurring the wrath of those who preferred the case to remain closed. Thorne, for one, would not be pleased. But the image of Rex, a loyal animal betraying years of training to snarl at a specific man, was too potent to ignore. It whispered of a truth deliberately buried, a lie meticulously constructed. Anya pushed herself away from the table, the scrape of her chair echoing in the quiet break room. "Miller," she said, her voice softer than usual, "where are Caelan's original case files kept? The physical ones?" Miller looked up, surprised by the sudden shift in Anya's demeanour. "Still down in C-Wing, I think. Archive Room 3. Why? You actually buying into that dog story?" Anya offered a tight, enigmatic smile. "I'm buying into the idea that sometimes, even the best of us, miss something." The archive room was a tomb of forgotten narratives, smelling faintly of dust and yellowed paper. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow on rows of metal shelving. Anya ran her fingers along the spines, a sense of grim determination settling over her. She found the box, labelled with Caelan's name and case number, tucked away on a high shelf. Pulling it down, she felt the surprising weight of it, a physical manifestation of the years of assumptions and official pronouncements. Back at her desk, the file box sat like a silent accusation. She hesitated for a moment, her gaze fixed on the faded handwriting on the label. This wasn't just a reread, it was an excavation. She remembered the official narrative. a rogue officer driven by greed involved in a smuggling ring that went sideways, resulting in the death of an informant. It had been a black eye for the department, a case swiftly closed to minimise public outcry. Anya opened the box, the dry rustle of paper loud in the quiet office. She started with the initial incident report, then moved to witness statements, forensic analyses, and Caelan's own sparse testimony. Her eyes scanned for the overlooked, the seemingly insignificant detail that might have been dismissed, the loose thread that could unravel the entire tapestry. She wasn't looking for grand conspiracies, not yet. She was looking for the almost imperceptible crack in the facade, the tiny inconsistency that had always nagged at her, now magnified by the image of Rex's frantic, desperate alert. The quiet intensity she reserved for her most challenging cases settled over her, a deep focus that narrowed her world to the words on the page and the phantom echo of a loyal dog's furious bark. The missing treat. The fluorescent hum of the cold case archive was a familiar drone, a soundtrack to countless hours Anya had spent submerged in dusty files and faded photographs. Tonight, however, the air felt charged, a subtle current of anticipation sparking at her fingertips as she meticulously re-examined Caelan Thorne's conviction. The initial review had yielded little beyond the already established narrative: circumstantial evidence, a coerced confession, a swift trial. But Rex's outburst, that was the variable, the wrench thrown into the neatly packaged tragedy. Anya pushed her glasses higher on her nose, the bridge aching slightly. She pulled every scrap of documentation related to the Thorne case, creating a fortress of beige folders around her small, cluttered desk. Each evidence log, every interview transcript, even the mundane daily reports from the arresting officers, was scrutinised with a renewed, almost desperate intensity. She wasn't looking for what was there, she was searching for what wasn't. Hours bled into one another. The stale coffee in her mug grew cold, then lukewarm again after a zap in the break room microwave. Her eyes burned, tracing lines of text, her mind a whirling eddy of details. The murder weapon, a hunting knife found near the victim. Caelan's fingerprints on the handle, explained away by a shared hunting trick weeks prior. The victim's blood on Caelan's jacket, which Caelan claimed was from a nosebleed the victim had suffered earlier that day. All plausible, all just plausible enough to secure a conviction in the absence of an alternative. But Rex. Rex didn't deal in plausibility. Rex dealt in truth, communicated through barks and lunges and the subtle stiffening of his powerful body. She flipped to the evidence inventory, a dense, multi-page document detailing every item collected from the crime scene. Each entry was numbered, described and initialed. A broken watch, a discarded cigarette butt, a muddy boot print. She scanned down the endless lists, her gaze snagging on a seemingly innocuous entry. Item number 17, partially consumed dog treat, generic brand, found near back porch. Anya frowned. Generic brand? Caelan was particular about Rex's diet. He always had been. She remembered him once chastising a rookie officer for offering Rex a store-brand biscuit. "Only the good stuff for my partner," he'd said, a rare, easy smile on his face. She flipped back through the initial crime scene photos, zooming in on the background elements. There, tucked under an overturned flower pot, was a small plastic baggie. The image was grainy, but the distinctive logo on the bag, a red bone surrounded by a blue oval, was unmistakable. It was the premium, all-natural, grain-free salmon treats Caelan always bought for Rex. The kind that cost a small fortune and were only available at specialty pet stores. Her heart gave a jolt. She cross-referenced the photo with the evidence log. Item number 17, the generic brand treat, wasn't bagged. It was described as partially consumed, suggesting it had been left out, perhaps dropped. The baggie in the photo, however, was sealed, and it definitely wasn't generic. A cold prickle ran down Anya's spine. That specific brand wasn't logged. It wasn't mentioned anywhere else in the inventory. It was as if it simply ceased to exist after the photograph was taken. Why? And if it was Caelan's, why would it be at the crime scene, neatly sealed, yet unacknowledged? Then it hit her. Rex's aggressive reaction to C.O. Jenkins. It wasn't just about Jenkins's presence, it was about Jenkins's scent. Rex had a phenomenal sense of smell. He was trained to detect minute traces of explosives, drugs, even specific human emotions. If someone had handled that specific brand of treat, Kaylin's specific brand, at the crime scene, then later presented themselves to Rex, the dog would have made the connection. Anya's mind raced, piecing together the fragments. Rex wouldn't just react to a random person. He reacted to C.O. Jenkins violently. What if Jenkins had been at the crime scene? What if he had handled those treats? Not only handled them, but perhaps used them, intending to placate Rex or even to lure him away, only to find the dog wasn't present. And then, realizing his mistake, discreetly removed the unique treat bag, leaving behind a generic one as a red herring. It was a flimsy theory, but it was the first thread of concrete anomaly she'd found that directly linked Rex's behaviour to the events of that night. The implications were staggering. If Jenkins had been at the scene, and if he had handled those distinct treats, then his scent would be inextricably linked to the place where the murder occurred. And Rex, with his infallible nose, would remember. The generic treat was a clumsy attempt at misdirection, but the photograph of the real treats, the unlogged ones, was the key. Anya felt a surge of adrenaline, chasing away the fatigue. This wasn't just a dog being protective. This was a dog remembering a scent, a presence, a betrayal. She slammed the heavy evidence log shut, the sound echoing in the silent archive. Her aha moment wasn't just a flicker of intuition. It was a cold, hard fact, staring at her from a grainy photograph. The missing treat wasn't just missing from the log, it was a missing piece of the puzzle, deliberately obscured, waiting for someone to finally put it back. And Rex, in his own wordless way, had pointed her directly to it. The game, she realised, had just changed. Profoundly. Scent of truth. The warden's office, usually a bastion of stern order, felt thick with Anya's quiet persistence. She laid out her findings, the discrepancy in the evidence log juxtaposed with the crime scene photograph, the violent outburst from Rex. Warden Thorne, this isn't about Kaylin's character anymore. This is about a critical piece of evidence that was either overlooked or deliberately altered. Rex's reaction wasn't random, it was directed, primal. I believe he recognised a scent. Warden Thorne, a man whose face seemed etched with the daily weight of correctional responsibility, leaned back, his chair groaning softly. Detective Sharma, you're asking me to stage a dog show in my maximum security facility, for a convicted murderer no less. His scepticism was a palpable force in the room. I'm asking you to allow a controlled behavioural observation, Anya corrected, her voice firm but even. If Rex reacts consistently, it validates my theory. If he doesn't, then we've lost nothing more than a few hours. But if he does, Warden, we could be looking at a corrupt officer and a wrongful conviction. She let the weight of that possibility hang in the air, knowing the implications for the prison's reputation would be immense. After a long, uncomfortable silence, punctuated only by the distant clang of a heavy door, the warden sighed, running a hand over his close-cropped hair. Very well, Detective, but it will be under my strictest supervision, and if that animal so much as nips at one of my men, this experiment is over. No exceptions. The designated area was a stark, sterile hall in an unused wing of the prison, far from the main population. The air hung heavy with the institutional smell of disinfectant and stale humanity. 4 correctional officers, chosen seemingly at random by the warden, Jenkins among them, his face impassive, stood at spaced intervals, each holding a small sealed plastic bag. Inside each bag, clearly visible, were a few of Kaylin's premium dog treats, the same distinctive brand from the crime scene photo. The warden and Anya stood to one side observing. Rex was led in on a leash held by a nervous-looking handler. The canine's tail was tucked, his body language wary, a stark contrast to the energetic, focused animal Anya had seen in the video footage of his attack on Jenkins. He looked smaller, subdued, within the cold confines of the prison. Anya felt a pang of sympathy mixed with an intense anticipation. This was it. The handler, following Anya's precise instructions, walked Rex past the first officer. The guard held out the treat bag. Rex sniffed tentatively, his nose twitching, then merely nudged the bag with his snout before turning away, disinterested. He showed no excitement, no recognition. The handler moved him to the next officer, the same result. Rex offered a cursory sniff, then ignored the offering. He was a professional, but not fooled by a simple treat. With the third officer, a burly man with a kind face, Rex again showed no interest in the bribe. The tension in the hall, however, was ratcheting up. Jenkins was next. Anya felt a prickle of unease, a knot tightening in her stomach. Would it work, or was she chasing a ghost? As Rex approached Jenkins, a subtle shift occurred. The canine's ears, which had been drooping, perked up. His tail, previously tucked, gave a tentative flick. Jenkins stood rigid, his expression unreadable, holding the treat bag out. Rex didn't look at the treats. His gaze, intensely focused, dropped to Jenkins's boots. A low growl rumbled in Rex's chest, barely audible at first, then growing in intensity. His hackles rose, a bristling line of fur along his spine. He tugged at the leash, pulling the handler forward, straining with a sudden, alarming urgency. His powerful body, previously subdued, now pulsed with a coiled energy. He wasn't interested in the treat in Jenkins's hand. He was utterly fixated on the officer's feet. Rex began to circle Jenkins, his head down, nose working furiously, inhaling deeply at the leather of Jenkins's patrol boots. The growl escalated, becoming a guttural, menacing sound that echoed in the sterile hall. He whined, a frustrated, angry noise, and then, with a sudden lunge, began to scratch violently at Jenkins's right boot, his claws raking at the polished leather. He whined again, desperate, then started to mouth and nip at the boot, pulling at the laces, completely ignoring the premium treats Jenkins still held aloft. Jenkins flinched, instinctively pulling his foot back, his composure finally cracking. A flicker of something, fear, recognition, crossed his face, quickly masked. The warden's eyes widened, a dawning realization replacing his earlier skepticism. Anya watched, a cold certainty settling over her. Rex wasn't reacting to the treats, he was reacting to the boots. To the persistent scent of something, or someone, he associated with betrayal, fear, and the crime scene. The scent of truth. The burn mark. The scent of stale coffee and disinfectant still clung to Anya's clothes as she returned to her cramped, document-strewn office. Rex's visceral reaction to Jenkins's boots replayed in her mind, a jarring chord against the neat symphony of Kaelin's conviction. It wasn't just a dog acting out, it was a beacon, shining a light on something she'd missed, something everyone had dismissed. She pulled up the digital archive of the Thorn crime scene photos, her fingers flying across the keyboard with renewed purpose. Pages of evidence logs, forensic reports, and witness statements scrolled past, but her gaze was fixed on the visuals. The victim, the shattered glass, the overturned furniture, all meticulously documented. Then she saw it. A faint, almost insignificant detail that had been logged but never fully explained. A small, irregular burn mark on the wooden floorboard near the back door, half hidden beneath a fallen curtain. At the time, it had been attributed to a stray ember from a fireplace that wasn't there, or perhaps a clumsy smoker, though no actual cigarette butts were found. It was an anomaly, filed away as an unsolved minor detail, overshadowed by the brutal reality of the murder. Now it sparked a flicker of connection in Anya's mind, a quiet hum beneath the surface of her thoughts. Burn marks. Jenkins. Anya leaned back, pushing a hand through her hair. The pieces were starting to shift, to rearrange themselves into a pattern far more sinister than she'd ever imagined. If Rex had reacted to Jenkins's scent, and if Jenkins had been at the crime scene, the burn marks suddenly seemed less random. She initiated a new search, this time focusing on prison staff medical records around the time of the murder. The digital interface of the prison's internal system was clunky, designed for efficiency, not investigative deep dives. Anya filtered by injury type and date range, stretching her net a few days before and after the incident. Hundreds of minor complaints, sprained ankles from basketball, paper cuts, routine colds, flickered past. Then a record caught her eye. Officer C. O. Jenkins. Date of injury, the day after Kaelin Thorne's murder. Injury description, second-degree burn, right forearm. Cause, kitchen accident, splashed with hot oil during dinner prep. Anya stared at the screen, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. A kitchen accident. The very idea was ridiculous. Jenkins wasn't assigned to kitchen duty, not regularly, and certainly not for dinner prep as a correctional officer on night shift. The explanation felt flimsy, a hastily constructed alibi. Most damningly, the location of the injury, a forearm, was consistent with fending off an attack, or perhaps with a struggle involving a hot object. She pulled up Jenkins's personnel file, cross-referencing his duty roster for the day of the murder. He had been on shift, working the night patrol. His reported whereabouts had him nowhere near the Thorne residence during the estimated time of death. But if he had been present, if he had been involved in the murder, a burn injury sustained during the struggle would explain the mark on the floorboard. The burn mark on the floor. Jenkins's burn injury the day after. The suspicious explanation. Rex's violent reaction to Jenkins's boots. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a thread, thin but strong, leading directly to C.O. Jenkins. Anya closed her eyes, picturing the crime scene again. The chaos, the violence, and a small, smouldering burn mark, a silent witness to a truth that had been buried under layers of assumption and convenience. Caelan Thorne had always maintained his innocence, and now, a canine with an infallible nose and a detective unwilling to let go were finally listening. The burn mark wasn't just a detail, it was a nascent accusation. And Anya knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she was just scratching the surface of something far more extensive and dangerous than a simple wrongful conviction. Race against the clock. The air in Anya's cramped office hung thick with the stale essence of forgotten coffee and a fresh wave of fear. Her desk, a battlefield of crumpled notes, stark crime scene photos and dense forensic reports, finally surrendered its secrets. Jenkins. The name resonated with a chilling clarity. That faint scorch on the floor, once dismissed as incidental, now screamed a desperate narrative of struggle. Caelan, cornered, hadn't gone quietly. A telltale burn, perfectly mirroring the size and imprint of a boot. Jenkins's boot, the one with the suspiciously recent singe. Anya's fingers danced across her keyboard, the staccato clack a frantic drumbeat against her racing pulse. She pieced together the grim tableau. Jenkins, fueled by a simmering resentment, perhaps a covetous gaze on Caelan's position or a festering grudge, had infiltrated the Thorne residence, not for plunder, but for a far more insidious personal vendetta. He'd known Caelan's rhythms, his habits. He'd known about Rex's cherished treats, the very same bulk-bought dog biscuits Caelan favoured, the same ones found stashed in Jenkins's locker, the identical ones that had provoked Rex's violent outburst. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with a horrifying precision. Jenkins, leveraging the familiar scent of the treats, had expertly lured Rex away, a calculated manoeuvre to neutralise the household's most devoted guardian. Then, the confrontation. The precise motive remained shrouded, a stark void Anya filled with the bleak possibilities of jealousy, an old debt, a compromising secret Caelan held. Whatever the catalyst, it had spiralled. Caelan had fought, perhaps even landed a blow, and Jenkins, in a spasm of rage or self-preservation, had silenced him forever. The burn wasn't merely a scorch, it was a violent imprint, a silent shriek from a struggle the initial investigation had tragically overlooked. She typed with a furious energy, weaving together the disparate threads. Rex's visceral reaction to Jenkins, the canine treats in the officer's locker, a stark anomaly for a canine handler, the distinctive burn mark at the scene, Jenkins's own burn injury sustained the day after the murder, and his sudden, uncharacteristic transfer to Caelan's prison unit. No mere coincidence. This was a pattern, a meticulously constructed trap, and Jenkins was its chilling architect. The clock on her screen glowed an ominous 4:17 p.m. Caelan's execution loomed at dawn. A glacial dread permeated her bones. Hours, she had mere hours to dismantle a conviction that had hardened over years. Anya yanked the multi-page report from the printer, her hands trembling imperceptibly. It was a dense stack of paper, yet it represented a precious life. She snatched her keys, their sharp jingle piercing the sudden silence of her office, and burst out, jogging down the corridor. The station was winding down, the evening's quiet hum replacing the day's relentless rush. Detectives, conversations muted by distance, began to pack up. Anya swept past them, her gaze fixed on the exit. The drive to the prison was a blur of streaking streetlights and desperate pleas. Each red light felt like a personal affront, a deliberate slowing of her desperate race. When her tyres finally shrieked to a halt in the visitors' lot, the prison loomed, a monolithic edifice of concrete and steel bars, a tomb for the living. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with a sterile tang of disinfectant and the unspoken gravity of the approaching dawn. She bypassed the standard check-in, flashing her badge at a startled guard. "I need to see the warden, immediately. It's urgent. Life or death." The guard, a creature of routine, hesitated. "The warden is in a meeting, detective, with the execution committee." "Perfect," Anya bit out, pushing past him. "Tell him Detective Sharma needs to speak to them, now." She located the conference room, a stark space dominated by a long, polished table and a few weary-looking officials. Warden Hayes, his face a roadmap of difficult decisions, looked up, his expression a blend of annoyance and resigned fatalism. The committee members, their faces etched with grim resolve, seemed to have already reached a sombre peace with the morning's grim task. "Detective Sharma," Warden Hayes said, his voice devoid of inflection. "Is there a problem?" Anya laid her thick report on the table with a decisive thud. The sound reverberated in the sudden silence. "Yes, Warden, there's been a grave miscarriage of justice. Caelan Thorne is innocent." Skepticism rippled through the room. One committee member, a stern woman in a dark suit, scoffed. "Detective, we've reviewed this case countless times. There is no new evidence." "There is now," Anya countered, her voice unwavering despite the residual tremor in her hands. She opened her report. "C.O. Jenkins. He wasn't just a witness, he was the killer." She launched into her findings, her voice gaining momentum with each revelation. She detailed Rex's reaction, the treats, the burn mark, Jenkins's injury. She painted a vivid portrait of betrayal and calculated murder, not a random act of violence. She watched their faces, seeing disbelief slowly yield to a dawning uncertainty, then a flicker of genuine alarm. "The burn mark on the floor, Warden," Anya stated, her finger tracing a diagram in her report. "It matches a boot, a specific kind of boot, the kind Jenkins wears, and he sustained a burn injury the day after the murder. Coincidence? I don't think so." She looked from face to face, her gaze locking with Warden Hayes's. "Caelan Thorne is scheduled to die at dawn. If you proceed, you will be executing an innocent man." The air in the room crackled with tension. The committee members exchanged uneasy glances. The weight of her words hung heavy, a profound challenge to the very foundation of their conviction. Warden Hayes picked up the report, his brow furrowed, his eyes scanning the pages with a new, urgent intensity. The clock was ticking, but for the first time, Anya felt a glimmer of desperate hope. A cold, sterile wind, born of the prison's ancient HVAC system, ghosted over Caelan's bare arm as the orderly tightened the last leather strap across his bicep. The metallic tang of antiseptic mingled with something else, a faint, almost imperceptible scent of fear, perhaps his own, perhaps the room's lingering memory. The fluorescent lights hummed with an oppressive drone, casting long, stark shadows that danced with every subtle movement of the two figures preparing the gurney. "Last call for a final wish, Thorne," the other orderly, a younger man with eyes that avoided Caelan's, mumbled. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. Caelan's gaze drifted to the small, grimy window on the far wall, a sliver of pre-dawn grey just beginning to bleed into the oppressive darkness. He saw nothing but the reflection of the execution chamber, a distorted tableau of his final moments. "Rex," Caelan rasped, his throat tight. I just wanted to see him one last time." The younger orderly snorted, a barely audible sound of contempt. "A dog? Really, Thorne? Even now trying to pull on heartstrings with your canine partner? He was more than a partner, Caelan said, his voice stronger now, a defiant tremor running through it. He was family. The older orderly, a grizzled man named Miller, stepped forward, a clear plastic IV bag in his hand. The liquid within, a pale, almost iridescent green, shimmered ominously. Family or not, Thorn, regulations are regulations. No pets allowed in the execution chamber. You know the drill. Caelan felt a prick as the needle found a vein in his arm. A cold sensation spread, a numbing wave that began to creep towards his shoulder. He closed his eyes, focusing on the image of Rex, vibrant and loyal, a blur of fur and boundless energy. He remembered their first day together, the dog's hesitant sniff, then the enthusiastic lick that sealed their bond. Betrayal, Caelan thought, was a sharper sting than any needle. Betrayal by the system he'd sworn to uphold, by the people he'd trusted. The warden's office was a stark contrast to the execution chamber's oppressive quiet. The phone on his mahogany desk shrieked, a jarring intrusion into the pre-dawn stillness. Warden Thompson, a man whose tenure was nearing its end, grumbled, reaching for the receiver. He'd expected the final clearance call, not this. "Thompson," he barked into the phone. "Warden, it's Detective Sharma," Anya's voice, breathless and urgent, exploded through the line. "You have to stop the execution, now. We have new evidence, irrefutable evidence." Thompson's brow furrowed. "Detective, you know the protocol. The committee reviewed everything." The governor signed off. "This isn't about the committee, Warden," Anya's voice rose, a desperate plea. "This is about C.O. Jenkins. He's the killer. Caelan Thorne is innocent. We have the boot mark, the injury, Rex's reaction. It all points to him. He's in the prison right now, Warden, likely on shift." Thompson's grip tightened on the phone. Jenkins, a good officer usually, but the details Anya was rattling off. They resonated with fragments of information he'd dismissed earlier. The unusual injury Jenkins had sustained, the sudden transfer request. "Hold on, Detective," Thompson said, his voice suddenly sharp, commanding. He pressed the intercom button. "Captain Davis, immediately halt all procedures in the execution chamber. I repeat, halt all procedures. And secure C.O. Jenkins, now." In the execution chamber, the gurney trembled slightly as Caelan felt a rush of cold fluid enter his veins. His eyelids felt heavy, his thoughts beginning to blur around the edges. He heard the faint murmur of voices, but the words were indistinct, like echoes from a distant shore. The green liquid in the IV bag was steadily draining. Then, a sudden, jarring clang. The heavy steel door to the chamber burst open. Captain Davis, his face a mask of grim determination, stormed in, followed by two uniformed officers and, shockingly, Detective Anya Sharma, her eyes blazing with a fierce urgency Caelan had never seen before. "Stop!" Anya yelled, her voice cutting through the sterile silence, reverberating off the cold walls. "Stop the execution!" The orderly paused, his hand hovering over the injection port. Miller, the older orderly, his face pale, stared at Captain Davis. "What's going on, Captain?" Miller stammered. "Stand down, Miller," Davis ordered, his voice brooking no argument. He turned to Anya. "Detective, he's already initiated." Anya rushed to the gurney, her gaze falling on Caelan, his eyes half closed, his breathing shallow. "Caelan," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. We know you didn't do it." Just then, the outer door to the observation room was flung open. Two more investigators, their faces grim, propelled a struggling figure into the room. It was C.O. Jenkins, his uniform dishevelled, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "What the hell is this?" Jenkins spat, trying to pull away from the investigator's grip. "You can't just... What's going on?" Anya turned, her eyes narrowing as she fixed on Jenkins. "C.O. Jenkins," she said, her voice dripping with ice. "We'd like to have a little chat about a certain boot-shaped burn mark, a missing canine, and the murder of Dr. Harris." Caelan, his mind still clouded by the sedative, felt a surge of something akin to adrenaline, a faint spark of life flickering back into the encroaching darkness. He strained to focus on Jenkins, the man who had stood by silently as Kaling was condemned, the man who had been the familiar face of his prison nightmare, the man who, it seemed, was the architect of his unjust fate. The interrogation room air, thick as a shroud, pressed down with a weight far heavier than brick and mortar. C.O. Jenkins, divested of his uniform and reduced to a man in street clothes, sat opposite Anya Sharma. The rigid authority that usually defined his features had crumbled, leaving a landscape of collapsing defiance. Just beyond the door, Rex, tethered to his handler, emitted a low, guttural whimper that vibrated through the walls, an unsettling, constant reminder of his unwavering accusation, each sound chipping away at Jenkins's already fractured composure. "The scent," Anya began, her voice a calm but unyielding current. "Rex recognised your scent at the scene, not just on the victim, but on the very items Kaling supposedly used. He was tracking you, Jenkins, not Kaling." She spread enlarged crime scene photographs across the table, gesturing to blurred outlines. "And then there's the testimony from your former cartel associates. They've confirmed your involvement, your desperation to secure loose ends. Kaling's partner was a loose end, wasn't he?" Jenkins flinched, his eyes darting toward the door as Rex's agitated growls intensified. The dog's primal aggression seemed to shatter something within him. He slumped forward, shoulders shaking. He knew," Jenkins rasped, his voice a threadbare whisper. "Kaling's partner was getting too close. He saw me talking to them, the cartel guys. He started asking questions." Anya leaned in, her recorder a silent, vigilant witness. "Questions about what, Jenkins?" "About the drugs, the shipments coming through the prison. I was getting a cut, a big cut. I told him to back off, but he wouldn't. He was a good cop, too good. He said he'd expose me." Jenkins's voice cracked, a blend of self-pity and lingering terror. "I couldn't let him do that, not with everything I had riding on it." The confession spilled out, a torrent of deceit and desperation. Jenkins recounted the murder's grim choreography, luring Kaling's partner to a secluded area under the guise of urgent intel, the brutal struggle, the horror in his partner's eyes as life drained away. He detailed the meticulous framing of Kaling, knowing the man's history of insubordination made him an ideal scapegoat. The drug cartel, he admitted, had helped orchestrate the setup, ensuring Kaling's silence. He even confessed to tampering with Kaling's canine gear, subtly transferring his own scent, a twisted irony that Rex had now turned against him. Outside the room, Rex barked sharply, then again, straining against his leash, a living embodiment of justice demanding its due. Inside, Jenkins finally broke, tears carving paths down his face. "I swear, I never meant for Kaling to get the needle," he choked out, sincerity lost in self-serving lament. "It was supposed to be life, just out of the way." His words hung heavy, a stark testament to betrayal. Anya, her expression unyielding, simply finished her notes and summoned the arresting officers. Meanwhile, Kaling lay on the sterile cot in the execution chamber, the sedative's cold tendrils already blurring the edges of his consciousness. Faces of the medical team were indistinct, the world a hazy whisper. Then a new voice, clear and urgent, pierced the fog. Warden Thompson's. "Hold the execution. I repeat, hold the execution." A flurry of activity erupted. The medical team froze, syringes poised. Kaling felt a brief, agonizing flicker of hope, a desperate spark in the encroaching darkness. Moments later, 2 guards entered, their movements swift and decisive, apprehending C.O. Jenkins right there in the chamber. Jenkins, pale and trembling, offered no resistance as he was led away. The antidote, a jolt of clarity and pain, seared through Kaling. He coughed, lungs burning, vision sharpening to reveal Anya Sharma standing over him, her eyes alight with weary triumph. "You're free, Kaling," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Jenkins confessed. We have him." The words were a lifeline, hauling him from the abyss. He was alive. He was innocent. Days later, the prison gates swung open, not for an inmate, but for a man reborn. Kaling Thorne, his name cleared, stepped into the crisp morning air, blinking against freedom's unfamiliar brightness. A throng of reporters, cameras flashing, shouted questions, but Caelan's gaze was fixed on a single, unwavering point: Rex. The canine, released from his handler, bounded forward, a blur of fur and muscle, knocking Caelan off balance with the sheer force of his joy. Caelan knelt, burying his face in Rex's neck, the familiar scent a balm to his scarred soul. Rex whimpered, licked Caelan's face, then nudged his hand, demanding a familiar scratch behind the ears. "You saved me, boy," Caelan whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You never gave up." The raw, profoundly human scene silenced the press's clamour, a reunion transcending words, a testament to an unbreakable bond forged in loyalty and tested by injustice. Later that day, in a public ceremony attended by police brass, the mayor, and a grateful community, Caelan was officially exonerated. Rex, proudly sporting a Medal of Valour, sat by his side, occasionally nudging Caelan's hand, a silent guardian whose unwavering trust had finally brought the truth to light. The city mayor, visibly moved, lauded Rex as a hero, praising his remarkable intelligence and loyalty. Caelan, standing tall with Rex, spoke briefly, his voice steady. "This isn't just about me," he said, gesturing to Rex. "It's about the truth, and about the incredible bond between a man and his dog. Rex knew, and he fought for me when no one else would." The crowd erupted in applause, not just for Caelan, but for the four-legged hero who had, against all odds, unbound justice.